Hi, I'm Heather Nemi Savage. Thanks for joining me today in my next segment in my series on musical form. Today we will be discussing minuets. Now you might ask, what is a minuet? Well, a minuet was an aristocratic dance that originated in France and was popular during the 17th and 18th centuries. The term minuet refers to both the dance and the music that accompanied the dance. Meredith Ellis Little, in her article on minuets in the Grove Music Encyclopedia, described them as having restrained yet complex elegance. They were dignified, graceful, relaxed, and unaffected, as one might associate with aristocracy. Now, these dances had 3 beats per measure and were of a moderate tempo. Now, minuets in different places would have some variation to them and take on a little bit of the culture in different places. So, for example, in Italy, the minuets tended to be a little faster than in other places. Minuets were first performed on keyboard instruments or guitars or lutes, or perhaps by small ensembles like a string trio. Now, this, of course, was in part because they were accompanying dances that were taking place in private residences, so there was a limitation on space. In contrast to a performance that was taking place in front of a large sitting, listening audience, those could involve larger groups. But the minuets, as they were primarily dances, needed to stay on the smaller side. Now, as was common for dance music, the minuet is pretty straightforward in its structure and usually has phrases of about 4 measures. Now, sometimes composers would write minuets for the stage. They were very common in operas. And in those cases, the composers would experiment a little bit with the phrase length because the virtuosic performers on stage could manage some more complicated choreography. So there was a little bit of variation depending on the setting in which the minuet was to be used and performed. Minuets use a binary form. So with bi, that means 2. So there are 2 parts to the binary form, A part and a B part. If you are unfamiliar with what I'm talking about, please, I encourage you to go back and view my video that's titled Introduction to Musical Form. So the minuet will have the A part and the B part, and they are roughly equal in length. Sometimes the parts will sound complete and independent from each other, but sometimes the A part will sound incomplete, as if it is leading into the B section. Both parts are repeated, so you'll hear A and then the A section again, then the B section, and then the B section again. The B section will normally begin in a new key, but return to the original key by the end of the section. Minuets are not the only type of music that is in binary form. There are many, many pieces that use this form. And in more developed binary form pieces, whether it's a minuet or another type of piece, composers started to derive material from the A section and use it to create the B section. Also, they experimented with lengthening the B section. And sometimes they lengthened the B section by reusing part of the A section, a little bit of a reprise, you could call it. Now, when the A section returns at the B section, it usually is not the whole thing, just a little bit of the A section. And when that happens, it is called a rounded binary form. So you can think of it like the A section is rounding out the piece. During the late 18th century and into the 19th century, as orchestras grew and as instrumental music became more prominent, composers used ideas from vocal music and dance music and incorporated them into the instrumental music. So minuets also were incorporated into instrumental music, and they were given their own movement as part of a larger work, like sonatas for a solo instrument or symphonies for an orchestra. Now, to make those movements longer, composers began adding at least one new section to the minuet. So that new section was given a term called trio. And so you'd hear the minuet, the whole thing, and then a trio section, and then back to the minuet again. So that became its own form called minuet and trio, and that is something that we will discuss in a future video. Now, what I'm going to do today is play for you 3 different minuets. 2 are by Bach, and 1 is by Grieg, and so Grieg's minuet came much later. So I will play these minuets and talk through some of the aspects of the pieces. And so you'll hear the form of the minuet, some of the melodic ideas, and I'll also discuss some of the things that I mentioned in my video, the introduction to musical form, as we talk about how the composers changed up a little bit of the music. So there you go. Okay, so the first minuet that I will play for you is the Minuet in G by Bach that I imagine that you have heard this before. But to start, let me just give you a little bit of the taste of the melody and count in 3 so you get an idea of the feel of 3 beats per measure. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so each measure has 3 beats, and in this minuet, the 2 sections are completely balanced with 16 measures in each section. So let me play for you the A section. So that's the A section, and normally we would repeat that, and then we would go into the B section. Now this is the Minuet in G, so it begins in G major. But at the start of the B section, we go into a new key, and in this piece we go into D major, which is the dominant of G major. Now, someday when I get all my music theory lessons done, you will know what that means, but you just need to know we go to D major. And what you're going to hear is a new note. Okay, so In G major, we have an F sharp, and in D major, there's an F sharp and a C sharp. So C sharp is the new note. Okay, so I'm going to play a little bit of the B section, and what I want you to hear is, although the B section does sound significantly different from the A section, you'll hear it goes up higher in the register of the piano, and the melody kind of changes shape. Instead of having the, and then you have this leap down and then going up 5 notes, right? The B section is going to be up high. Oops, gotta look at the music. Okay, the melody kind of swirls around a little bit instead of going up in straight lines. However, there is a rhythmic similarity to the A section. So the A section, on beat 1, there's a quarter note, and then there's 4 eighth notes on beats 2 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, right? But in the B section, we have 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that is a way that Bach connects the two sections. So even though they sound different, there is still some connection between the two. And anyway, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a little bit of the melody of the B section again and point out the C sharp, okay? That is the C sharp right here, C sharp. Okay, so then what happens is at the end of the B section, we will go back to G major, and that's how it will end. So here's the entirety of the B section. Okay, so now I am going to play the entire minuet. So you'll hear section A repeated, section B repeated, and that will give us our binary form minuet. And think of the movies, okay? Your period movies, the dances in the ballroom with the aristocracy. It's very elegant and reserved, okay? slowed down there at the end to signal the dance was coming to an end. So, one more note on this one is that the first section, the A section, does sound like it ends, and it does have that feeling of being complete without needing the B section. So this one does not lead into the B section. But there you have it, the Minuet in G by Johann Sebastian Bach. So the next minuet I am going to play for you is also another minuet in G by Johann Sebastian Bach. But this one has a very different sound to it, so I'm going to play a little bit. You might be familiar with this one too, but I'll play a little bit of the melody. Okay, that's how it begins. Now, there's some really interesting things about this one. The first is that the right hand and the left hand, so in musical terms, we would call this the upper voice and the lower voice. And in this one, the upper voice begins that melody I just played for you, and then the lower voice comes behind it and imitates it a little bit. So there's some of that going on. This one is a rounded binary minuet. So at the end of the B section, you will hear the A section return. Another interesting thing about this minuet is that the A section begins in G major, and this is another one where the A section does sound pretty complete on its own. It's just, short, but it does not sound like it's leading into the next section. But the B section, instead of going to the key of D, like the last one did, this one is going to the key of E minor, which is what is called the relative minor of G major. They're connected. They share most of the same notes pretty much, but E minor often includes a D sharp to kind of indicate this, I don't know, it's a minor sound. So right away in the B section, the left hand will bring out that new note, which is the D sharp. So once again, at the end of the B section, we return to G major, but this time instead of ending right away, we go and hear the return of the A section. Now, what we hear in the return of the A section is not the entire thing. We hear the second half of the A section. So that second half of the A section ends the A section, and it also ends the B section. So this minuet is a little bit more complicated than the last one. And the B section is definitely longer. There's also, I think, a more clear connection between the melody of the A section and the melody of the B section. The rhythm, again, is very similar. And there's a section of the A section in the left hand where you will hear a little bit of the swirl of a melody like this. And then in the B section, that shows up in the right hand, but going in the opposite direction. Instead of swirling up, it swirls down. Okay, so there's a lot of little motific, we've talked about in the video on the introduction to musical form about a motive as a little tiny group of notes. And Bach really plays around a lot with these tiny motives. So you can hear little bits that first are introduced in the A section, but then they show up in the B section slightly changed. I'm just going to go and play the entire minuet for you. Section A, then section A again, then section B with the return of a little bit of section A at the end, then back to the beginning of section B, all that, then the little bit of section A at the end before it comes to a close. The last minuet I will share with you today is a minuet titled Grandmother's Minuet by Edvard Grieg. Now, Grieg was Norwegian, and he lived a couple hundred years after Bach, so the music is quite different. I'm going to play a little bit of the melody at the beginning of the minuet so you can hear how the accent seems to fall on a different beat than it did in Bach's minuets. So, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So it has a different feel than the Bach minuets, but it generally follows the form of minuet. Grieg does not repeat the A section, so he didn't follow the rules, but he's a composer and he can do that. So in this minuet, the A section is not repeated at the beginning. Interestingly, this minuet also begins in G major. I did not plan things that way. That's just how it turned out, that all three minuets would begin in G major. In the B section, which is very, very different from the A section, both hands are playing the same notes an octave apart. And I would argue that in this, Grieg moves to E minor, just like the second Bach minuet that I played today. And then at the end of the B section, Grieg brings back the A section. However, it is changed. So if you think back to my video, the introduction to musical form, we talked about how if a section is repeated, but it is not repeated exactly the same way, we call it prime. So at the end of the B section, Grieg brings an A prime section in. The same melodic material is used from the A section. However, instead of doing it exactly the same as before, Grieg moves the motive up and down different octaves in the piano. So the form of this minuet is A, B, A prime, B, A prime. So the second half, well, it's longer than half, but the second half is repeated. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for you. Those are the 3 minuets I'm going to share with you today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Stay tuned because I will continue to bring you lots of different pieces with different forms. And I hope that this increases your listening pleasure. See you next time.